It was a hot summer night when my best friend Ricardo and I, both 19, decided to escape our luxurious lives in North Jersey and enjoy the summer vibes at the Jersey Shore. My place in Belmar was cozy, but Ricardo's house in Lavaland had a chill, party-ready atmosphere that always drew me in. One evening, as we drove the hour-long stretch from my house to his, we tossed around ideas for the night. Rather than hitting up a wild party, we craved a more laid-back vibe, just some beers, a joint, and a private beach where we could kick back under the stars. After a few drinks at Ricardo's place, we grabbed some bikes from his garage and set up towards our chosen beach. As we pedaled, Ricardo led the way, choosing a secluded spot that seemed eerily quiet. The houses were dark, their lights off, and not a soul in sight. The desolation was comforting, perfect for a late-night escapade. We stashed our bikes under some shrubs and made our way to the beach, feeling the cool sand beneath our feet with the sound of waves crashing around us. We were lit up, laughed, and soaked in the night sky, hoping to catch a shooting star. But then we heard it, a faint metallic buzzing sound that sent chills down my spine. It was barely noticeable at first, reminiscent of the hum of fluorescent lights in a gym. But as we sat there in the dark, it grew impossible to ignore. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as Ricardo and I exchanged uneasy glances. What was that noise? Our laughter faded into nervous whispers, and our eyes darted around, scanning the shadows. Then, just as we decided to leave, the sound escalated from a soft buzz to a deafening roar. Panic surged through me. I could feel my heart racing as we jumped to our feet. The noise was closer now, a sinister presence lurking in the darkness. We bolted towards the sand dune, not knowing what we were running from, but desperate to escape. Halfway to safety, Ricardo stopped me with a firm grip on my shoulder. I followed his gaze in frozen terror. At the peak of the dune stood a dark figure, impossibly tall, with arms that seemed to stretch towards its knees. Its stillness was haunting, sending a wave of dread through me. "Run!" Ricardo shouted, pulling me back to reality. We sprinted parallel to the beach, desperate for escape. When we reached the next dune, we dared to look back, and what we saw literally froze my blood. The first figure remained at the top, but now there were 3 or 4 others, all eerily still, facing us. Their dark silhouettes loomed in the moonlight, and we didn't dare linger. We didn't even think about our bikes. We just ran. The adrenaline was pushing us all the way home. The following morning, we retraced our route, heart pounding with fear. But the bikes were gone, perhaps stolen or worse, taken by whatever had stalked us the night before. To this day, I can't really shake the unsettling feeling of that night. The buzzing sound remains a mystery, and I've never encountered anything like it again. The memory of those dark figures on the dune haunts me, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows, waiting for an unsuspecting victim. Beaches have always instilled a sense of dread in me, a fear that roots itself in an unforgettable childhood experience. As a kid, I eagerly anticipated summer weekends spent at our beach house, or if I was lucky, at my friend Charles' beach house in Long Beach Island. It was the summer when I was 6, and excitement bubbled in the air as Charles, our mutual friend, Riley, and I prepared for a weekend of unsupervisioned fun at Charles' place. Riley, who had just gotten his driver's license, was in the driver's seat, and his unsteady driving made for a hilarious ride down. We laughed uncontrollably as we swerved and cursed at the road, making the trip feel quick and exhilarating. Once we arrived, we rushed to unpack our things in the cozy beach house. Taking note of the layout, the house had a front door, a garage door, and a back sliding door leading to a deck that connected to the upstairs bedrooms. Most importantly, the back faced a narrow lagoon, offering us a perfect view of the dark waters. The 3 of us were at the age where chasing girls consumed our thoughts. With a beach house all to ourselves, we couldn't resist the urge to invite some girls over. After some messaging, we managed to convince 3 cute girls, Rosie, Alexa, and Sophie, to come hang out with us. We had stocked up on enough alcohol, pilfered from our parents to fuel our wild weekend. As the night unfolded, we all jumped into Charles' small backyard pool, the steam rising and the gentle breeze mixing with the sweet smell of smoke from our joints. We were blissfully carefree until Charles suddenly turned the music down, his eyes fixed on something in the darkness across the lagoon. Confused, I turned to see what had captured his attention, but the shadows obscured any details. "Why do you turn it down?" one of the girls asked. Charles whispered that he saw someone standing on a dock across the way. I laughed it off, thinking he was just trying to scare us. After all, people lived there. But Charles insisted. "I know that family. They're supposed to be in Florida." A chill crept up my spine, but I brushed it aside, dismissing the unease. The girls, however, seemed unnerved, and when they expressed a desire to go inside, I was ready to agree. We climbed out of the pool and started drying off. But then Riley suddenly jumped, his face pale. "Look!" he exclaimed, pointing towards the lagoon. We all turned to see movement at the dock, and as a car passed by, its headlights briefly illuminated the horrifying sight. There were 4 tall figures standing at the edge of the dock, their shapes indistinct but menacing, and they were definitely facing us. "Come on, everybody, get inside!" Charles shouted, his voice trembling. Panic surged as we rushed into the house. The tension thickened the air. Just then, we heard a series of splashes echoing behind us. They were swimming across the lagoon, and that's when pure terror took hold of us. The girls screamed as Riley slammed the sliding door shut and locked it, while Charles hurried to secure the front door. We scrambled to hide in a room out of sight, our hearts pounding in silence, waiting for the next sound to reveal what was happening outside. Moments stretched into eternity until Riley suddenly cursed, realizing he had forgotten to lock the sliding door on the deck. Charles' eyes widened in horror as he grasped the reality of our vulnerability. Just then, we heard a soft, unnerving sound of footsteps above us. That was it. The fear kicked into overdrive. With no weapons and fueled by adrenaline, we sprinted for the front door. Bursting into the night, Riley scrambled to start a car, his nerves making him reckless, as he smashed into Charles' mailbox while fleeing. Once we were far enough away, we called the police, the chaos still fresh in our minds. When the authorities arrived and searched the house, we discovered the shocking truth. Some items from the top floor had vanished. But that wasn't even the worst part. Charles' family boat, a medium-sized Boston whaler, had also been stolen, most probably used as a getaway vehicle. The police speculated that the thieves had used a spare set of keys Charles' father kept hidden under the steering wheel. As we processed the horror of the night, the nagging question remained: how did he know where the key was? The police were unable to catch the culprits, leaving us haunted by the idea that the robbers might have known Charles' family personally. It's been years since that terrifying event, but literally, guys, not a day goes by that I don't double-check every lock in my home. Trust me, you should do the same. Lock your doors at night, because you never know who might be lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The New York City subway system can be a terrifying place, even for some like me who has spent 7 years working for the MTA. Though I've seen my fair share of bizarre incidents, one particular experience stands out, etched in my memory like it happened yesterday. This occurred about 2 years into my tenure while I was stationed in Brooklyn, performing routine maintenance at High Street Station. The platform was utterly deserted, a stark contrast to the usual hustle and bustle. The eerie silence enveloped me, broken only by the buzzing lights and the occasional rumble of passing train. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed through the tunnel, jarring me from my focus and causing me to drop my mop. It was an unfamiliar sound, reminiscent of a rock hitting metal, a noise that sent a chill down my spine. I strained my ears, hoping to discern the source, but the silence returned. Perhaps it was just an animal or debris fallen, I reasoned, and I went back to my tasks. But then, it happened again, this time twice as loud. Unease settled in my gut as I thought about the possibility of 2 pieces of the ceiling collapsing in quick succession. Setting aside my tools, I cautiously approached the tunnel entrance. I hesitated, debating whether to call out. Ultimately, my curiosity won, and I shouted into the darkness, but there was no response at all. Just when I thought I could shake off the oddities of the day, a child's voice cut through the silence, calling out for help, laced with desperation. My heart raced as I sprinted to the edge of the platform. I shouted back, asking if the child was okay, but there was no reply. Panic set in when the voice called out again, repeating its plea. "Yes, I can hear you," I yelled, urgency in my voice. "Where are you?" The answer sent a shiver through me. "In front of you. Just keep walking." A surge of dread washed over me. What kind of situation was I stepping into? I hesitated a bit, but the thought of leaving a child in distress was unbearable. I took a cautious step forward, but a new realization struck me. I yelled again, asking what was wrong. The child's response was chilling. "Just keep walking." By now, the darkness ahead was starting to reveal more than I wanted to see. I could make out a shadow, what seemed like a small child standing just beyond my reach. But right next to it was a taller shadow, a figure of an adult looming ominously. My blood ran cold. This was not happening. I turned slowly, my instincts screaming at me to get out. As I hurried back towards the platform, the child's voice rang out behind me, pleading, "Wait, where are you going?" But I didn't look back. I bolted up the stairs, my heart pounding. And once I had service, I called the police. Within minutes, officers swarmed the station, and I anxiously awaited their findings. After an exhaustive search of the tunnel, they uncovered something chilling, a single child's shoe lying on the tracks, suggesting something sinister might have transpired. Hours passed as they resourced databases for missing children, assuring we would be notified if anything surfaced. As the night wore on, the realization hit me hard. What if the child's voice had been a trap? I mean, was it a desperate call from a kid coerced by some twisted individual? My imagination raced as I considered the horrifying implications. Whoever had been down there could still be lurking in the dark tunnels, hidden from sight. The thought of what that child might have been going through haunted me, leaving a chilling imprint on my mind that I would never forget. At 25 years old, I lived in a beach town, just a short 20 minutes walk from the shore. My life revolved around the ocean. 80% of my personality was beach-related. I had been surfing since I could talk, and sand was a permanent fixture in my shoes. My two best friends, Armin and Chuck, were charismatic extroverts, and we were all obsessed with girls. One Saturday night in late May, just a few weeks before graduation, my friends and I were ready to push our luck. With college acceptance already in hand, we were done worrying about high school. That evening, Armin and I planned to pick up girls from our high school, and that was Sophia and Fran. We had blankets and bottles of wine, ready for a perfect night of stargazing on the beach. Arriving at Sophia's house just as after 9 p.m., I noticed that she and Fran had clearly pre-gamed a bit. Armin and I exchanged excited glances. It was going to be an unforgettable night. I chose a scenic beach about a 30-minute drive away, far from the crowds, ensuring a clear view of the stars. We parked as close as we could to the beach and grabbed our supplies. After a few hours of laughter and an empty wine bottle, Armin and Fran wandered off down the beach, while Sophia and I drifted in the opposite direction. The darkness wrapped around us, and we eventually collapsed onto a blanket, intoxicated and relaxed. But then, Sophia tensed up beside me. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I strained to listen, dismissing her as just tipsy, but soon I heard it too, a strange whirring sound like a smoke engine buzzing nearby. It flickered in and out, then faded away into silence. I reassured her it was nothing and tried to get back to our moment. But just then, Sophia shrieked, pointing at the sky. I was all confused. I turned to follow her gaze and froze in terror. Hovering above us, perfectly silhouetted against the moon, was a drone. It hovered for a moment before zipping off into the darkness. Suddenly that eerie whirring made sense. My stomach dropped at the thought of being watched the whole time. I glanced at Sophia, and her face mirrored my horror as she broke down in tears. I tried to console her, but we both know we had to leave. We hurried back to the car, where Armin and Fran were already waiting, looking stunned. I quickly explained what had happened, and the joy we had felt just moments ago vanished into the night air. The drive back was silent, tension thick in the car as I attempted to lighten the mood. But it was clear that the girls didn't feel safe going home. It was a Saturday night, so I didn't mind staying out late. I suggested we hang out at one of our houses, but their parents wouldn't allow it. As a last resort, Armin called Chuck, whose house was large and perfect for a group. To our relief, Chuck was free. I parked in Chuck's driveway, but as I stepped out, unease settled in. I needed a moment to process everything. Leaning my forehead against the steering wheel, I closed my eyes. But when I finally glanced at my phone, horror washed over me. A notification lit up the screen. It was literally saying this: AirTag found moving with you. Panic surged through my body as I realized we were being tracked. I leaped from the car, frantically searching every inch of it. Nothing on the bumpers, nothing under the seats. Sweat dripped down my back as I dropped to my hands and knees, inspecting the undercarriage. When I reached the driver's side tire, my fingers brushed against something. A small device tapped to the inside of the wheel well, nearly impossible to spot it. My heart raced as I ripped the airbag from its hiding place and crushed it underfoot. Whoever had been watching us knew exactly where we were. I was so terrified as I sprinted to the front door of Chuck's house, breathlessly explaining what I had found and showing them the shattered remains. Everyone's face paled, and the gravity of the situation hit us all. The girls checked their phones, confirming they had received the same alarming notification. Chuck was furious. We had unwittingly led a predator to this house. After a night spent in Chuck's basement, we tried to forget the horror, rationalizing that some creep wanted to spy on us. At the beach, it was chilling, but we felt relief that it hadn't escalated. 3 weeks later, on a quaint Sunday morning, I received a frantic call from Chuck. "Get to my house now," he shouted, panic in his voice. I rushed over, finding him in his driveway, a look of dread on his face, clutching a stack of papers. As I stepped closer, my stomach twisted in knots. They weren't just papers, they were photos. Grainy, dimly lit images of me and Sophia on the beach that night. I felt sick. The reality of being watched turned into the nightmare of being photographed. How would Sophia react? We called the police, who said there was little they could do. We insisted they check for fingerprints, but nothing turned up. Sophia was terrified, fearing blackmail, and I felt the same. The trauma of the experience lingered, but thankfully nothing more came of it. Probably because we involved the police. Still, the tension between us changed. Sophia was never quite the same around me after that night. I could only hope those photos wouldn't resurface, haunting us in the future. I have been a trucker for nearly 15 years, and what happened to me in 2017 is an experience I'll never forget. I was making an overnight haul through the Mojave Desert in California, heading to a destination in Arizona, delivering appliances, or at least that's what I think I was doing. It was pitch black, with darkness stretching in every direction, and my semi's headlights were dim and flickering. I had been menacing to get them fixed, but I'd put it off for too long, with hardly any other cars on the road. The poor visibility made me squint to see the road ahead. As the hour dragged on, I contemplated pulling over to wait for dawn, but the thought of losing precious time, money I desperately needed, kept me going. The road ahead was straight shot, so I convinced myself it would be fine. About an hour before sunrise, something caught my eye in the distance, an approaching light that seemed to be moving quickly. I panicked and I slammed on the brakes, my truck screeching on a halt just a foot from a car parked in the middle of the road. Its hazard lights blinked ominously, and the passenger door hung wide open. Curiosity piqued, and I carefully reversed and pulled over. I thought maybe someone needed to jump or was in some kind of trouble. As I got out, I noticed how still the night was. No wind, no sounds, just that faint clicking of the hazard lights cutting through the eerie silence. The car was a shiny red Ford Fusion, and I approached cautiously. To my shock, when I peeked inside, it was completely empty. I checked the back seat, the front, and there was no sign of anyone. Unease settled in my stomach, and I felt as if eyes were watching me from the shadows of the desert. I glanced around nervously, scanning the dark for any signs of life, but the only thing illuminated was my truck's headlights, cast in long shadows. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate further. I looked in the car again, and everything seemed normal. The keys were in the ignition, but the engine was off. I approached the trunk, hoping to find some answers. It was locked, but I grabbed the keys and managed to unlock it. To my dismay, the trunk wouldn't open. It was jammed from the inside. I tried to access it through the back seat, and to my surprise, it opened easily. As I reached inside, I noticed 3 squishy garbage bags and a length of rope binding the truck shut. Just as I leaned closer, the loudest gunshot I'd ever heard rang out, reverberating through the night. Panic shot through me, and I slammed my head on the car roof in shock. I tossed the keys into the front seat and scrambled back to my truck. That's when I heard a gravelly voice yelling in the distance, calling out repeatedly. Then as the voice was there, it grew closer and closer. As time was passing and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, I jumped into the cab of my semi and I turned the ignition. My heart raced as I threw it into gear, my hands shaking as the engine coughed to life. I caught a glimpse of a figure standing by the trunk of the car, a short, stocky guy with wild red hair, wearing overalls and high boots, and on hand he gripped a small shovel and in the other an old hunting rifle. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and his expression was a mixture of worry and urgency. As I drove past him, he dropped the shovel and waved his arms, shouting for me to wait, but there was no way I was sticking around. I slammed on the gas, my truck lurching forward, heart pounding as I glanced in the rearview mirror. The man sprinted after my truck for a few seconds before veering back to his car, clearly desperate for me to stop, but I was not about to oblige. I sped down the road, pushing the semi faster than I should have. After a few minutes, I thought I was in the clear until I spotted headlights rapidly approaching behind me. My heart sank as the realization set in. He was on my tail. I frantically dialed 911, relaying the details as best as I could. The car behind me began honking madly, the sound piercing the stillness of the desert night. I kept driving, praying he wouldn't try to ram me off the road. After what felt like an eternity of him right in my bumper, he suddenly cut in front of me, slamming on his brakes. I nearly crashed into him when out of nowhere flashing police lights appeared ahead. The man swerved off to the right, disappearing into the darkness of the desert. Relief washed over me as I pulled over, waiting for the officer to arrive. I breathlessly recounted the bizarre encounter, but instead of chasing the guy down, the officer decided to take my statement. I was infuriated. Didn't he realize that this guy might be still out there? I urged him to leave immediately, insisting the suspect was getting away, but the cop brushed me off, assured me they'd conduct a thorough search once backup arrived. I drove away, but they never called with any updates. Since then, I told the story countless times, and while some friends think the guy was burying bodies, I find it hard to believe. He had a small shovel, and those bags seemed too tiny for anything sinister. For my own peace of mind, I tell myself he was probably just putting a sick animal to rest. But the truth is, I've never felt comfortable driving through deserts at night again. The haunting memory lingers, and the darkness out there feels alive, filled with secrets best left buried. I'm sure you've come across those trendy videos where truckers share their daily routines and helpful tips. Well, as a younger guy in this industry, I see them all the time on TikTok and YouTube Shorts. I had to drop out of a prestigious university for personal reasons, and people often tell me I could have been so much more than just a trucker. But honestly, I've been on this road for over 2 years now, and it's not a big gig. The only real challenge is the long hours. You never truly grasp how isolation can gnaw at your mind until you experience it firsthand. My advice, make peace with your inner demons because they will haunt you during those lonely stretches. Believe me, I learned that the hard way. This particular incident happened just 3 months after I landed my first trucking job. I was still as green as they come, making a long drive from southern New Jersey to Lafayette, Indiana. A grueling 12-hour trek. It might not sound too crazy, but consider that I had just finished an 8-hour drive, and you'll see why I was feeling the strain. Determined to get my deliveries done as quickly as possible, I decided to drive through the night, aiming to arrive in Lafayette just before 3 a.m. For a while, things went smoothly. The roads were particularly empty, allowing me to push the semi a little faster than usual. But halfway into the drive, I reached for a can of Red Bull from the center console, only to realize I had forgotten to restock my supplies after the last delivery. I slammed my hand against the dashboard in frustration. Stopping to grab an energy drink was the last thing I wanted to do. The idea of falling asleep behind the wheel was equally terrifying. Reluctantly, I pulled into the first service area I spotted. What I found wasn't a service stop, but an abandoned gas station that had been turned into a rundown convenience store. Not exactly what I was hoping for. I figured I'd check it out anyway, and it was a total bust. I'd head to a nearby store I had spotted on the way. As I parked the truck and stepped inside, I was greeted by darkness. Every light was off, and the place was eerily quiet. I have expected the door to be locked, but to my surprise, it swung open. My heart raced as I scanned the room, hoping against hope that I'd find at least a drink or some snacks left behind. Just as I was about to turn back, my eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I noticed a faint glow coming from a door at the back of the store. My curiosity got the better of me, and I slowly opened it. To my shock, I found a refrigerator plugged into the wall. I hurried over and yanked the door open, only to discover it was completely empty, shelves stripped bare, as if someone had gutted the whole appliance. As I was shutting the door, I thought I heard a clatter from the main room, a noise that sent chills down my spine. I froze, listening intently. Was it just my imagination? Cautiously, I stepped back into the main area, scanning for anything out of the ordinary. Nothing. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, urging me to leave. I had no time for this nonsense. I hurried out of the store as my heart was racing and jogged to the nearby convenience shop that was thankfully open. After grabbing a drink, I dashed back to my truck, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. But as I took that one last look at the abandoned store, my stomach immediately dropped. The door was now ajar, swinging slightly in the breeze. I was sure I had just shut it behind me. Dread settled in. I needed to get back on the road and shake off this unsettling feeling. As I emerged back onto the highway, the caffeine kicked in, jolting me from my fatigue. I tried to push the bizarre encounter out of my mind, but the image of that empty refrigerator kept creeping back in. Just then, I noticed strange movements in the curtain behind me, a bellowing that sent a jolt of panic through my veins. Sweat dripped down my forehead as I watched the curtain shift. Even though I hadn't turned on the air conditioning, my heart raced. Was someone in my truck? I didn't have any weapons, so I quickly typed the nearest police station into my phone. The drive to the station felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. I imagined whoever was in my truck reaching out to grab me, or worse, trying to take control of the vehicle. When I finally arrived, I parked as close as I could and bolted towards the police station. In mere seconds, my truck was surrounded by officers. As I opened the bag, what I saw will haunt me forever. 3 homeless individuals emerged, 2 men and a woman, all looking disheveled and wrapped in filthy blankets. One of the men brandished 2 switchblades, while the others glared at me with menacing stares, refusing to utter a word. As they were cuffed and led away, I was left with more questions than answers. What did they want, and what had they planned? The encounter lingered in my mind, a chilling reminder of the unpredictability of the road. I didn't stick around to find out. I just wanted to escape that crazy nightmare, and that's all. My name is Kevin, and I've been a trucker for various companies for nearly 15 years now. Over the years, my routine has become second nature. Pick up goods, verify their accuracy, and deliver them without a hitch. Since we're not paid by the hour, efficiency is key, and as someone who has been in the game for so long, I like to think I can outwork all the younger guys eager to grab these jobs. But pushing myself to the limit often means operating on barely any sleep, and that can lead to dangerous situations. 4 years ago, I was working for a warehouse in North Dakota. For those unfamiliar, it's one of the flattest states, making trucking a bit easier. However, that flatness also meant that skipping a few hours of sleep could be the difference between keeping my job and getting fired. On a chilly Tuesday morning in May, the start of the week brought a heavier load, meaning more work for me. Determined to knock everything out in one go, I plotted my route into Montana, planning to drive straight through without stopping to sleep. I hit the road a few hours after lunch, expecting to reach my destination by early morning. The clock ticked past midnight, and I was fighting to keep my eyes open, pushing the semi as fast as I dared. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, willing myself to focus. And to keep myself alert, I remembered my buddy Thurston, another trucker who had introduced me to smelling salts. With just one sniff, they could wake you right up immediately. I took a big whiff, feeling the rush of adrenaline surge through me, hoping it would last until I reached my destination. But a half hour later, I was still struggling. My eyelids felt heavy, and just then, the truck drifted towards the shoulder, jolting me awake. Panic set in. I needed to pull over immediately, but the highway was deserted, with dense woods flanking either side. Slowing down, I scanned the area desperately for a place to stop, but when my headlights illuminated something odd ahead, a purple dress lay in the middle of the road. Confusion gripped me. Was I hallucinating from the exhaustion? Or what was happening exactly? I blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was real, and as I drove closer, dread began to settle in. About 200 yards further, I spotted a pair of shoes. My heart raced. What was going on? I continued to drive, praying for a safe place to pull over. My father, David, was a deeply religious man, so I clutched his old cross, hoping for protection. Just a little further, I saw more scattered clothing, some of it looking like it belonged to children. That's when the panic hit me like a wave. Something was seriously wrong. I stopped the truck and sat there, my instincts screaming at me to stay put. After a moment, curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped out to inspect the pile of clothing. The cold morning air was biting, awakening my senses and heightening my awarenesses. As I approached, I realized it was indeed kids' clothing, both boy and girl items mixed together, glancing around into the shadowy woods. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I had to keep my wits about me. This could easily be a trap, Suddenly I heard a crunching noise from my left, and I whipped around as my heart was pounding in my chest. I stood there frozen, waiting for another sound. After what felt like an eternity, a second crunch echoed from the opposite side of the road. Fear surged through me, and I sprinted back towards the truck, adrenaline propelling me forward. Just as I leaped into the cab, a child's scream shattered the silence, freezing me in place. My heart raced as I stood at the crossroad. I didn't want to confront whoever was lurking in the dark woods, but I couldn't just abandon a child in distress either. Before I could decide, another scream rang out, almost identical to the first one. My instincts kicked in even more, and without a second thought, I fired up the truck and pointed the headlights towards the woods where the sound had come from. As the beams of light cut through the darkness, I spotted 3 or 4 figures hiding behind some trees. One of them was holding a massive speaker. My stomach dropped as I realized they were trying to lure me into the woods with a fake child scream. I sat there, stunned, processing the bizarre scene unfolding before me. I reached for my phone to call the police, but before I could even start dialing, I heard a loud thump on the body of the truck, a distraction from the other direction. Fear coursed through me. I had to get out of there. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor, tearing away. From that nightmarish scene, I caught a glimpse of a figure on the other side of the road who shouted something I couldn't make out before throwing something that cracked my passenger side window. The sound echoed in my ears as I sped off into the night, the adrenaline pumping through my veins. The final hour of driving was eerily silent, my mind racing with what had just happened. There was no way in hell I was stopping to sleep anywhere near those woods. When I finally completed my delivery, I collapsed into a deep sleep, 10 hours straight. And when I woke, the first thing I did was call in the police, who promised to investigate the woods and keep me updated. In the quiet aftermath, I replayed the night in my mind, cursing myself for stepping out of the truck. I should have minded my own business, but the thought of children in the danger was too compelling to ignore. To this day, I still have no idea what those people were planning. Why didn't they rush me when they had the chance? Or what would have happened if I had run into those woods after hearing the screams? After all of these years on the road, nothing has ever come close to being as strange or downright terrifying as that experience. It was a rainy night as I drove home from my shift at the late-night diner. The night had been quiet, yet I felt an unusual burst of energy, knowing I'd need to take melatonin when I got home to finally unwind. My route was a scenic road, picturesque by day but shrouded in darkness by night, with only the occasional parking lot for nearby restaurants or shops breaking up the stretches of dense, looming forest. As I passed a familiar deli, I noticed a woman standing under a flickering light post, waving her hand frantically. I slowed down, my heart racing with a mix of concern and hesitation. She looked to be in her mid-50s, tall and thin, soaked to the bone from the rain. "Do you need a ride?" I called out. She heard over, as her voice was dripping with gratitude as she praised me for my kindness. I asked her where she was headed, and she said just up the road to town. Against my better judgment, I opened the door to let her in. As she settled into the passenger seat, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. While she seemed sweet, I couldn't ignore the unsettling gaps in her smile. She was missing several teeth. My mind raced with questions. Was she homeless? She didn't smell like it, but the rain could have masked any door. Her hair was soaked and clung to her face, which made her look even more disheveled. Still, she smiled the entire time, appearing harmless enough. We pulled up to a gas station and I figured I might as well fill up. "Do you want anything from inside?" I asked. She said, "No thanks, honey." I then went in to pay for gas and grab a few drinks. But when I returned to the parking lot, my heart dropped. The woman was gone. I scanned the area frantically, but she vanished into thin air, feeling a mix of concern and relief. I filled up my tank and continued my drive home. Once inside my apartment, which occupied the first level of a two-family house, I kicked off my wet shoes and set the drinks on the counter. I wasn't quite tired yet, so I took melatonin and I tried to settle in for the night. However, sleep eluded me, as my mind was racing with thoughts about the woman I had just picked up. Strange noises from outside my bedroom made me dismiss the sounds as my upstairs neighbor, but deep down, I wish I had been more suspicious before drifting off. I jolted awake in a dark room, a rarity after taking melatonin. Drowsy and incredibly thirsty, I reached for my water on the bedside table when I noticed a shadowy figure crouched in the corner of my bedroom, hidden behind my dresser. My heart dropped into my stomach. This had to be some hallucination. I shook my head violently, even slapping myself, but the figure stood up and walked out of the room. I was frozen in shock, unable to scream or move as panic coursed through my veins. The silence that followed was deafening. Not a sound from outside, no footsteps, not even the creak of a door. Desperately, I grabbed my phone and called my dad, breathless and panicked. I said, "Dad, I saw someone. There was someone in my room." He answered, confused, suggesting I might have just had a night terror. I stayed on the line with him as I gathered the courage to leave my bedroom, turning on the living room lights. I scanned a small place, but I was alone. I began to think, maybe I had imagined it all, but locked my bedroom door and forced myself back to bed, the shadows seeming to close in around me. Morning light eventually broke through the darkness and I stumbled out of bed, still shaken from the night before. I made my way to the foyer, only to find the door was already unlocked. My heart sank. Was last night real? I searched the apartment to confirm I was alone and stepped outside to my car to grab my gym bag. That's when I noticed them, damp yellow-brown stains covering the back seat, and my blanket was gone. Overwhelmed with unease, I skipped the gym and stayed locked inside my apartment, feeling genuinely disturbed. I knew I couldn't stay there much longer. The unsettling events of that night haunted me, driving me to find a new place to live within the month. That's what I did, as the fear of what could have happened was too much to bear. A lingering reminder of how a simple act of kindness can sometimes lead you into the unknown. A few months ago, I found myself in a situation I never should have agreed to, tagging along with my friend Michael to a house party during our first year of high school. I wasn't even invited, but Michael had a way of charming his way in, and I reluctantly accepted the invitation, knowing I wouldn't be able to drive home. When we arrived at the party late that night, Michael insisted I leave my phone in his car. You could lose it, he warned, or someone might try to grab it. I was confused but nodded, feeling a twinge of unease as we stepped into the vibrant chaos of the backyard party. Laughter and music filled the air, mingled with the smell of smoke and alcohol as groups of teens huddled together, some indulgent in who knows, whatever you call it. After a couple of hours of mingling, I realized I'd had way too much to drink. My vision was a hazy blur, and I leaned against the wall for support. I checked my watch, and I saw it was either midnight or close to 1 a.m. It was definitely time to find Michael, but as I stumbled through the crowd, I couldn't spot him anywhere. I then asked a few partygoers if they had seen him, but no one could help. Frustrated, I reached into my pocket to call him, only to realize that my phone was back in the car with Michael. Panic surged through me as I faced the reality of my situation, with no way to contact anyone and the party swirling around me. I decided that my only option was to walk home alone. I remembered my house wasn't far, but the chilly fall air sent shivers down my spine as I stepped out into the darkness. I began walking, but each step felt heavier than the last. The drinks had left me dizzy and lightheaded a little bit, and I found myself lost in a whirlwind of thoughts. Why had Michael abandoned me? Why did I listen to his ridiculous idea about leaving my phone? Regret washed over me as I scolded myself for drinking too much. As I walked, fatigue set in, and I crossed my arms tightly over my chest to ward off the cold. I was absolutely desperate to get back home. I remembered hitchhiking, holding out my thumb. I watched as car after car drove past, ignoring my silent plea for help. Just as I began to lose hope, a gray truck pulled up and stopped in front of me. Relief flooded through me as I stumbled towards the vehicle. The window rolled down, revealing an older man with a scruffy beard. He asked if I needed a ride, and without thinking twice, I climbed into the truck, feeling grateful for the unexpected kindness. As we drove, he attempted to make small talk, but I was too disoriented to respond properly, only managing murmurs in reply. However, as we turned the corner onto my street, a sense of dread washed over me. Something felt off about this man. My instincts screamed that I should get out, but I couldn't bring myself to speak up. Suddenly, we drove past my house, and my heart raced with fear. I opened my mouth to tell him to stop, but before I could utter a word, he turned to me with a sinister grin. "You know," he said, smirking, "you shouldn't be drunk while hitchhiking. You'd make a very easy target." My blood ran cold as he reached over and began rubbing my leg. I was frozen in terror, paralyzed by his menacing aura, when out of nowhere, the blaring sirens of a police car pierced the night. The truck was flooded with flashing red and blue lights, and in that instant, hope surged through me. The man panicked and slammed on the brakes, fumbling to unlock the doors. I seized the moment and jumped out of the truck, running as fast as I could towards the approaching officer, breathless and shaking. I recounted everything that had just happened. The officer listened intently, but unfortunately he explained that he was looking for a gray truck involved in a theft from a store nearby. I didn't know if it was the same man or not, but I felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude for the intervention. The officer gave me a ride home, and as I sat in the passenger seat, I reflected on the terrifying encounter. I realized then how crucial it was to be responsible and aware of my surroundings, even when trying to have a good time. That night changed everything for good. I vowed never to let myself get that out of control again.